Up next is Michael. Are there any questions? All right, then. Up next is Michael Merriam. These mics around.
Look at me! No, wait. I can work every microphone we have up there. It's rocking. They're taking the microphones away. We get one. I only need one. Hi, I'm Michael Merriam. I have people sneaking around behind me. I'm one of the co-organizers of MinSpec. I have two people sneaking around behind me. Jesus. And while I'm up here real quick, I wanted to pitch the MinSpec anthologies, Northern Lights and Sky Tinted Waters. If you're not familiar with MinSpec and you like what you've heard, they're really good samplers of what the group does. There's 20 short stories in each of these books written by members of MinSpec, including people in the room like Hillary Moon Murphy and Joel Arnold and, Conrad and Catherine, Shishiwe and Eli. Yeah, so you could buy some of those, and you could get them signed by a bunch of people. Terry Faust, I missed him. He's back there, someplace. Right there. So I'm going to do something a little different. I'm usually considered an urban fantasy author and sometimes a steampunk guy, and I'm going to read space opera. Because I've got a new short story collection and it's all space opera. Don't ask me how I ended up writing space opera. The thing that surprised Captain Kathleen Reed the most about commanding a pirate ship was the amount of paperwork involved. She set her data pad on the gray middle desk and closed her eyes. Pain was starting to set in behind and between her eyes, the kind of pain that only the master of a marauding space vessel knew. Too much paperwork, not enough plunder, that was the problem. If only she'd stayed sober, she would have never gotten into this mess. The ship's intercom buzzed on her desk, and she barely recognized the voice over the static. She thought it might be her executive officer, and he might have said, "Captain to the bridge," which was reason enough for her to leave the ship's accounts unfinished. Captain Reed stepped from her ready room onto the bridge of her ship, the Black Manta. She looked at her executive officer. Roger Baldry was well into his 60s. Most thought him too old for this life, and he did have grandchildren back on Pegasus, but she knew Roger could outfight pretty much anyone on her crew. "What have we got?" she asked. "Civilian bulk freighter," Baldry said. "An old Savros, probably a second series Mark III. She raised an eyebrow. "All the way out here? And all alone?" The throat cleared. Captain Reed turned to her gunnery officer. "Yes, Janet." "It's a trap, ma'am. It's a Mapamani cruiser disguised as a freighter. There's no other explanation." Captain Reed nodded. Janet Sobrinsky thought everything was a trap, up to and including the food served in the mess. The annoying thing was, sometimes Janet was right. "Orders, Captain?" Baldry asked. Reed looked out her window at the freighter. "Fire a laser burst and transmit an order to cut their engines and prepare to be boarded. Tell them if they cooperate, no one gets hurt." "Aye, ma'am," Janet said. Reed felt the low hum of her ship's cannon powering up. The lights on the bridge dimmed, and the ship gave a slight shudder as the weapon discharged. The engines on the big freighter glowed white-blue, and the ship turned starboard and down. "They're running," Baldry said. "So it seems," Reed sighed. "Match their speed and course. Stay with them, helm." "Aye, ma'am," her helmsman said. "He won't get away." Captain Reed was not worried about her quarry getting away. Older ship might be, but there was no way a freighter would be able to best the Manta's speed and maneuverability. "XO, get the boarding party together and down to the airlock. I'll join you after we dock. And Roger, tell everyone over there to be extra careful. They might be smugglers this far away from the normal shipping lanes." Baldry nodded. "Yes, ma'am." We turned to her gunner. "Target their engines. Use a missile. I want them to know we mean business." There was a metallic clank from deep in the ship, and the man rocked. "Missile away." Reed watched the chemically propelled weapon close rapidly on the target. She was surprised at the lack of any countermeasures by the freighter. The warhead on the missile exploded well before impact, sending a shockwave filled with shrapnel into the back of the ship. It was enough to make the old engines dim. "Helm, take us in." Captain Reed sat in her chair and grabbed the armrest. Roberts, her helmsman, made the landings hard and noisy to frighten the occupants of the ship they were raiding. She watched the big old Savage freighter fill her window screen. There was a jolt and a series of loud clangs as the Manny's landing gear slammed down into the hull of the freighter and gripped it magnetically. A second loud thump and the airlock sealed. Lock and seal, Roberts said. Reed stood. Good. Mr. Roberts, you have the bridge. Janet, you're with me. Captain Reed actually smiled as she rode the lift to the lower deck. This was exactly what she needed to take her mind off of her troubles. 2 minutes later, she was standing among a dozen members of her crew, pistol drawn, preparing to board the freighter. Open it. A pair of crew members stepped forward, a young blond man carrying a small electronic device, and a brown-haired woman nearly as old as the captain with a large wrench. The young crewman placed a piece of electronics near the joined airlocks and started punching buttons. After a minute, the lights on the device and the airlock controls all turned green. Ready? Reed looked at the woman and nodded. The woman jammed the wrench handle through the airlock turn wheel and, with a grunt, gave it a tug. There was a hiss of air, and she withdrew the wrench and spun the mechanism. The hatch opened. The smell of slightly stale air and food past its prime filled their noses, and no one was shooting at them. This came as a pleasant surprise to the captain. Go, she shouted. Janet Sabrinsky charged into the vessel, screaming at the top of her lungs. Behind her, a dozen of the crew followed, each brandishing their weapons and yelling a war cry. Baldry snorted and stepped through the airlock into the freighter. Janet likes doing that entirely too much. Reed laughed. All the youngsters do. Well, no sound of gunfire. Maybe this will go off clean after all. One can hope. So what do we have on the chief's wish list this time? Reed asked. Baldry pulled the pad from the pocket of his flight suit. He poked it a couple of times, shook it, slapped its side. The pad whined and gurgled and made a noise like a hissing cat. Induction couplers and coils, targeting sensors, circuit boards of any kind, soldering wire, copper tubing, fresh water, yeast. Reed smiled at the last. So that's what he plans to do with all that wheat grain he's been hiding in the engine access tubes. It's supposed to be a secret, Baldry paused. So I think we'll brew something up that won't kill the crew or make them all go blind, unlike some other idiots on board. The captain's reply was cut short by the screaming ahead of them. She drew her pistol, set off at a jog toward the voices. She turned the corner and pounded down a middle staircase toward the narrow corridor as the young blonde technician started up. Report. Captain, there's, well, I think you'd better see for yourself, ma'am. What is it, Jeffers? Children. The captain looked up at the sound of her gunnery officer's voice. Janet stepped around the corner and into the corridor. A brown-haired girl, no more than 10 years old, clutched Janet's hand as if it were a lifeline. The girl's face was flushed from crying, and she stood slightly behind Janet, barefoot, shivering in a floral dress. There's nothing but children on this ship. Captain Reed holstered her weapon. She squatted down and looked at the little girl and smiled. Can you tell us where all the grown-ups are? The Tenari took them. Jeffers snorted. There's no such thing as Tenari. The Shadow Stalkers are just a bedtime story spacers and colonists tell their children to scare them in line. Kathleen Reed stood and drew her pistol in one swift motion. No, the Tenari are real. She made eye contact with Baldry, who swallowed, sweat breaking out on his bald head. If the girl was telling the truth, they were well and truly screwed. They had met the Tenari, Reed and Baldry, done battle with them in the one encounter between the two species. They knew the myth for the ugly reality. In those days, the Black Manta was just the Manta, a fast attack interceptor of the colonial defense forces, protecting far-flung outer colonies. Lieutenant Commander Baldry was the ship's chief navigator and second officer, Reed a first lieutenant. By the time they escaped the colony planet of Iago II with the children left behind from the Tenari raid, half the landing party was lost to shadowy, lightning-quick creatures, and the Manta, her captain killed in action, had fled the sector at best speed, their hold filled with frightened, orphaned children. It was the last time humans and Tenari interacted for 20 years, until this raid. How many kids on this ship? At least 50. When they came, the adults loaded us on the ship and ran, but they found us, the girl whispered in a tiny voice. Captain, Baldry asked, round the children up and transform the Manta. We get them safe and we run. Keep the crew in teams of 3 or... Ma'am, a voice cracked in her ear, we have incoming ships. 2 minutes to intercept. Seal the airlock and undock, she shouted into her comlink. Her ship was helpless, attached to the hull of the freighter. Ma'am, Roberts' voice echoed. That's an order, Mr. Roberts. Undock and send a distress call. There was gunfire, the sound of ripping cloth, and a man's short scream echoed down the corridor. The lights on the freighter flickered and died as a wail of terrified children filled the air. The comlink went silent. Baldry and Janet produced emergency lights from their belts, filling the corridor with a flickering, washed-out illumination. Reed gripped her weapon tighter and licked her lips. Her crew had gathered around her, a gaggle of dirty and underfed children mixed into the lot. All right, Baldy and Jeffers, come with me to the bridge. Janet, take the others. Round up the children and get them to engineering. Barricade yourselves in there and try to get this tug running. She turned to the brown-haired woman with the wrench. Tilly, you're the closest thing to an engineer we have. I'm counting on you to get this ship moving. We need power and we need propulsion and we need it yesterday. Janet nodded, turned to the rest of the crew. You heard the captain. Form up around the young'uns and stay sharp. Who's got more lights? Get them out. Move, people. With a sloppy salute, Sabinsky took point of her little party and the whole mess moved out. Reed watched them for a moment before turning to the two men with her. Let's go. Captain, what's the plan? Jeffers asked. Draw the enemy off. Try to gain control of the ship at the bridge, Baldry answered. He looked at the younger man. Are you ready for some close-up action? Jeffers nodded his head, his face pale. They moved along a gentle curve in the corridor and found the first casualty. Baldry frowned. Levy, God help him. No one can help him now, Reed said. We trust his speed. Don't worry about noise. We want to draw them away from Janet anyway. Baldry nodded. I'll lead. Reed gave him the go-ahead and the older men set out down the dimly lit corridor, Reed in the middle of the formation, Jeffers in the rear. How far to the bridge? Reed gasped out between breaths. She was not familiar with the older ships still in service. Should just be another 20 yards or so, then 2 levels up. Shouldn't. Drop! Reed yelled, raising her pistol. Baldry dived toward the deck and twisted, bringing his own weapon into play. It shimmered from the darkness, a long, sinuous shadow, 6-limbed, the bear's hint of a wedge-shaped head on a long neck. Reed fired wildly as the thing moved along the ceiling. The pistol roared and echoed in the enclosed space, and bullets ricocheted dangerously off the steel walls. Jeffers ducked as the captain fired us over his head, and as quickly as the creature appeared, it was gone, and so was Jeffers. Captain Reed stared into the darkness that had seemed to consume her man. Just like that, silent as the grave, one of her crew was no more. Jeffers, she called out. He's gone, Baldry said, grabbing her arm. We have to get to the bridge. Captain, we have to get to the bridge, Pete barked in his best parade ground voice when she failed to move. Reed jerked her arm out of his grip and pushed the fresh magazine into her pistol. Lean on, XO.